Wel, mae hwn yn bwnc eitha diddorol ac yn wahanol iawn i'r pethau eraill ni wedi clywed heddiw mewn llawer o ffyrdd. Fel archeolegydd, dwi yn aml iawn yn dweud wrth bobl bod yn gwlad bod holl tiroedd yn gwlad ni yn dangos yr arwydd o effaith o dynoliaeth, effaith dyn ar y tir. Dwi wastad wedi gweld fel rhyw fath o olion bysedd dynol ar draws y tirwedd i gyd. Mae'n atgoffa ni fel archeolegwyr bod y tirwedd yn ni'n byw arno fe ddim yn naturiol. Rhywbeth o wnaethuria dyn yw o'r môr i'r mynydd, ychydig iawn o dirwedd naturiol sydd yn weddill. Mae dynoliaeth wedi cael effaith ar bopeth. Mae hwnna'n werth bwysig i bawb i gofio. Ac ymhlith yr olion amlyca yw'r cloddiau. Y cloddiau sydd yn diffinio percy ar draws ein gwlad, ar draws Sir Benfro a pob rhan o Gymru a thu hwnt, ac yn gorchuddio'r tir mewn ffordd. Ac wrth edrych ar y cloddiau traddodiadol yma sydd dros ein gwlad, a pan dwi allan yn y maes yn wir, dwi'n edrych arnyn nhw a synnu weithiau i feddwl bod pob un o'r cloddiau yma, a chi'n gwybod cystal y fi bod miloedd a miloedd a miloedd ohonyn nhw, wedi cael eu codi trwy llafur a gwaith llaw pobl. Yn llythrennol, gwaith caib a rhawoedd y cyfan. Bydde pob un o'r cloddiau yma wedi cael ei godi a llaw, bydde pob ffos yn cael ei gloddio a llaw, pob carreg yn cael ei chwarela, ei chario, a'i gosod mewn lle a llaw. A pan chi'n meddwl amdano fe cyn oes y JCBs, roedd hynny yn waith arwrol ym mhob ffordd. Ond felly, dyn ni'n gweld y cloddiau yma yn bob man. Ond sut mae'n ei synwyr ohonyn nhw i'r cwestiwn, ynddo fe? Yr olion bysedd cymleth yma sy'n yn addurno'r byd o'n cwmpas ni. Mae llun o'r awyr ar y sgrin gyda chi ar hyn o bryd sy'n dangos darn o Sir Benfro, ganol Sir Benfro, yn ardal Castell y Fuwch. Ac dwi wedi dwgyd y llun yma, dwi'n credu o dudalen archwilio sydd iddo i ymddiriedolaeth archeolegol Dyfed. Dwi'n siŵr bydden nhw'n maddu i fi am wneud hynny. Ond mae'n dangos faint mor gymleth mae'r tirwedd yn gallu bod. Gwelwn am y ddarnau o'r tir sydd heb gael eu cau mewn eto, darn o'r tir comin felly, yn ogystal â thiroedd sydd yn rhan o'r patrwm percy yma sydd yn gorchuddio yr rhan fwyaf o'r tir. Yn gymysg ar cloddiau a'r percy yma i gyd, chi'n gweld ambell i darn bach hynafol iawn fel y gair yma sydd yn dyddio i oes yr haearn, Castell y Fuwch ei hunan er enghraifft, sydd wedi cael ei ynysu braidd yng nghanol y patrwm percy llawer mwy diweddar. Ac felly, does dim amser i fi fynd mewn i hanes datblygu'r patrwm percy heddiw, darlith arall yw hynny. Ond beth sydd yn bwysig i nodi fan hyn yw bod y cloddiau ei hunain yma yn ffynonellau hanesyddol bwysig iawn ym mhob ffordd. Ac mae'n bwysig i gofio peth arall. Mae yna ffynonellau hanesyddol sydd yn dangos sydd yn esbonio i ni ac yn dweud yn glir wrthon ni bod y rhan fwyaf o tirwedd Sir Benfro er enghraifft a Cymru o ran hynny yn eitha agored cyn tua'r flwyddyn 1600. Felly mae'r rhan fwyaf o'r cloddiau a'r percy i ni'n gweld heddi yn gymharol diweddar yn termau hanesyddol. Mae'r rhan fwyaf ohonyn nhw wedi ymddangos o fewn y 4 i 300 mlynedd diwetha. Cyn hynny roedd y tir ar y cyfan yn gwbl agored. A chi'n gweld yr un ardal ar y map yma, chi'n gweld eto y cymlethdod y tirwedd. Ac Mae cliwiau ar yr hyn mapiau yma, dyn nhw'n gweud llawer wrthyn ni chwaith, dim llawer mwy na beth mae lluniau o'r awyr yn dweud wrthyn ni. dyw'r llunellau di ar y map ddim yn dweud llawer am beth yw cyflwr pob clawdd, beth yw hanes neu ffynonell pob clawdd, beth yw deunydd sydd wedi cael ei defnyddio i godi'r clawdd ac yn y blaen. Ac felly, ac ni hefyd yn gweld, os ych chi'n edrych yn ofalus ar y map, dim jyst un patrwm percy sydd yma, mae yna sawl wahanol patrwm ar waith yma, am fod cenedlaethau o wahanol y ffermau wedi gosod stamp eu hunain ar y tir. Chi'n gwybod mae cenhedlaeth yn dilyn cenhedlaeth, yn gwneud rhywbeth bach yn gwahanol bob tro. So dyma y cloddiau traddodiadol ni'n siarad amdano nhw. Ond beth ydyn nhw? Sut mae'n gwneud synwyr yn hynny oedd cwestiwn oedd ni'n gwynebu ar dechrau'r prosiect yma. Ac nawr, mae yna ddefnod amser i hyn, wrth gwrs mae'r hanes yn un peth, ond hefyd mae'r amrywiaeth o ffurfiau y cloddiau yma, a'r deunydd sy'n cael ei defnyddio. Dyna beth sy'n eisiau ni cael yn mynd i'r afel i cael dechrau wneud synwyr. Ac dyna oedd yn cwestiwn eitha diddorol, achos ar amser beth sy'n byw yn Sir Benfro, mae'r gair clawdd neu claw yn cael ei defnyddio i disgrifio bob math o ffiniau, cloddiau pridd, cloddiau cerrig, walydd, banciau, ffensys ambell waith. Ond i'r llawer o ffermau clawdd yw clawdd. Mae pethau'n cael eu taflu i'r clawdd, twlu i'r clawdd. Ond, fel dwi'n gweud, mae fel llawer mwy gymhleth na hynny mewn gwirionedd. Ac, wrth gwrs, mae'n amhosibl, mae'r tir mor fawr, hyd yn oed mewn sir fel Sir Benfro, mae'n ardalaethau eang. Mae'n amhosibl i fynd allan i edrych ar bob clawdd a pwyso a mesur hanes pob darn o'r clawdd, wrth gwrs, ym mhob parc. So, roedd rhaid ffindio am ffordd, fath o shortcut, ffordd rhwyddach o dechrau dod i'r afel o'r cwestiwn yma, diffinio'r cloddiau traddodiadol yma. A hefyd gweithio, pwrpas y prosiect oedd i weithio mas ffyrdd o gyfalu ar ôl y cloddiau traddodiadol yma, achos yn sicr, dyn ni ddim eisiau colli nhw yn y pen draw. A fel dwi'n gweud, maen nhw hefyd, ni fel archeolegwyr, maen nhw'n rhan o archeoleg y wlad. Dyn ni'n anghofio hynny. Dyma'r falle arwyddion mwy amlwg sydd gyda ni o waith y cenedlaethau y fi. Maen nhw'n rhan bwysig o'n tryftadaeth ni, so mae'n bwysig bod ni'n gyfalu ar eu holau nhw. Nawr, trwy lyc, dwi'n mynd i ffindio ni ffordd, y shortcut oedd angen. Ni'n ffodus iawn yng Nghymru i gael defnyddio un ffynhonnell go bwysig, sef landmap. Nawr, dwi ddim yn mynd i siarad am landmap, dwi'n ei paso hyn draw i Jenny nawr i siarad ychydig am landmap ar ôl mae wedi chwarae yn y prosiect ni. Ac wrth gwrs, nawr mae Jenny yn siarad yn Saesneg, so i'r sawl ohonych chi sy'n dilyn cyfieithiad i'r Saesneg, felly chi troi y cyfieithu bant nawr a clywed ar y Saesneg yn unig. Diolch.
Thanks, Paul. Right, so what you can see here on the screen, as Paul says here, is our Chloddiau. This is the website developed by the Welsh Archaeological Trust to show the data from historic environment records. And much as that would be very exciting, we haven't got time to look at that today. But what we're looking at here is one of the additional layers of information they have, which is the land map historic landscape character areas or aspect areas. You can see the areas outlined in orange. And those are the things that we are looking at. Now, land map was developed by the National Resources Wales, and it's a way of characterising or depicting different parts of the landscape across Wales in order to try to understand them, to help manage them, and things that are similar are together, and things that are dissimilar from the next area are put apart, if you see what I mean. So, for instance, here in the centre of the screen, we've got an area of scrubland without possibly a piece of common that's left over and wasn't enclosed. And that's quite distinct from the fieldscape then that's surrounding it. And just up in this top corner, it's distinct yet again an area of settlement. So it's a way of looking at different areas, trying to get a handle on, how would you look after this area compared to this area? You're not going to do the same thing. And do you want it still to keep looking like that, or do you want it to change or whatever? And also you can monitor it over time. Now, the great thing about land map for us was that not only have little polygons drawn, little shapes drawn on it, but also there's information stored about each of these things. And when we started thinking, well, how are we going to approach this project? It was a time-limited project, it was a money-limited project, but trying to get a handle on the traditional boundaries in Pembrokeshire, what were we going to do? So the first thing we thought, well, you know, always best to reuse something that you've already got, rather than just leap in and start doing something fresh. So we thought, right, we'll use landmap. And here you can see where the park is, because those are the areas in purple, there, all the way around here. And the areas in green are some of these aspect areas, some of these little defined areas that are wholly within the park. And the grey ones are ones where partly in the park and partly outside in Pembrokeshire. And you can see here the size of some of them. You've got a massive, huge area here in the grey, partly in park, partly not. And then look at some of the smaller areas around St David's or up here in Preseli. And you get an idea of variance that you can get going on. But we thought, brilliant, right, okay, let's use this. And handily, again for us, one of the pieces of data that was recorded within landmap was the main traditional boundary within an area. What if you looked at it, what would you say? We would say it's dominated by post and wire fences or dry stone walls, you know. And also maybe what a secondary sort of boundary. So it's mainly post and wire fences, but also dry stone walls, and we pull that data out. So we did sort of some analysis on this and got a series of maps which helped inform us then. Now this one is showing where Pembrokeshire Hedges was defined as the main traditional boundary. You can see here that there's quite a dense area up north of Preseli's, some area within Preseli's, not a lot elsewhere. I would add in here, there's a little bit of problem with terminology, because although there were terms within landmap that had to be used, or a glossary, they weren't defined as to exactly what they meant. So sometimes if you or I looked at a boundary, one might say it's a dry stone wall, one might say it's a rubble bank, for instance, depending on the state of it and what we knew about them. So there's a little bit of overlap. For our purposes, this was giving us a good guide. Dry stone walls, when you think about it, it sort of becomes a bit more, it's sort of obvious, but in areas where stone, particularly surface stone, is readily available, you've got dry stone walls. In areas where it's not so readily available, you don't have dry stone walls at all, or at least not as a dominant type. Earth banks, again, you're starting to get this area that has been blank up to now, starting to show some colour. Earth banks, and the next one, hedge banks, they're a bit interchangeable, because quite often an earth bank has a hedge on it. So when do people decide, oh, that's a hedge bank, when's it an earth bank? But it gives us a good general steer. And here you can see this area, very heavy with hedge banks coming in. Mortared walls then, another story again. Probably when we think about it, it becomes a little bit more obvious as to why it's happening. It tends to be in some of the more settled areas, around settlements. Also maybe some of the estates having an effect there, that they wanted posher walls, etc., etc. But sort of up here, you're not expecting to see mortared walls in Preseli, for instance. And stone rubble banks are showing similar sort of thing as to a dry stone wall. And there is an element of, well, when does a dry stone wall become a rubble bank? Well, when it's fallen down, could be an answer to that. So just to quickly look at what these different field boundary types were, how they look in section. Here we've got a dry stone wall. We've all seen dry stone walls, stones built up with no earth within them. The core may have a little bit of earth, but it's usually filled with smaller stones, and should usually have some form of tie stone going through the middle to bring the whole thing together, so your wall just doesn't collapse outwards. And it may or may not have a coping stone. I mean, this is quite a nice fancy wall, but so we've all seen So it may not have a coping, but that's the elements of it. Earth banks, it's fairly simple. They're a bank made of earth. You pile it up, you pat it down. This is actually from a drawing about how to manage an earth bank, how to repair one, which is why you've got the turf and earth here. So you retain the turf to put over the bank up here. And this is repaired, but it's the same process when you're building it. The repair and the building of an earth bank are very similar. You may have a stone core at centre, or you may have stone content within here, but it's an earth bank. Now, lynchets are slightly different, or at least traditionally thought of as slightly different, because whereas those first two examples are created in order to define a boundary, these are created through the process of managing the land within parcels, so that by ploughing, the soil creeps or gets dragged down slope, and you end up with these steps in the landscape. So they're not necessarily created, right, I'm going to create a lynchet today to define my field. They're created over a process of time, but they become solidified in a landscape. They are there when you look for them, and they may now have a hedge bank or a hedgerow added, or a stone wall, for instance. Some of them are even add stone facing added to them to stabilise that near vertical slope. And the last one here is our Pembrokeshire hedge. So we can see here why this differs from a dry stone wall. It's got stone facing on either side, quite thick, built up. It's got tie stone still to tie it into this earth core, because otherwise, if you don't tie your stone to this earth, you're just going to find it all comes a puddle and whatever. And traditionally, these are actually hedged with a thorn hedge of some sort. It could be gorse, it could be bilberry, blackthorn, hellthorn, etc. Whatever's going to grow in the area. Quite often gorse, because that will grow in harsher landscapes. And again, you see this is actually an example from Cloddiau, which is a sort of agricultural scheme, and it's showing people how to repair these, and actually recommending them putting a drain in to stop this getting waterlogged. So, using what we were sort of gaining about the different sorts of boundaries we might see, and using that information from land map about where different boundaries might be found and might dominate, we chose then 6 areas to have a look at in more detail and actually go out and do some field work, not excavation, but actually recording these, prodding these, having a look at them. And these are the ones we chose. So we've got Moyle Grove up in some north of Presely's, Cloddiau on the eastern side of the Presely's, or east side Presely's there, Greenways down the south, Manorbier, St Anne's Head near Dale, and Porthmouth near White Sands Bay. And so Paul is now going to go through these and just describe a little bit about what we saw.
Okay, thank you, Jenny. I'll carry on in English now for the rest of this. And I'll be quite quick. I'm aware that time is pressing, of course. So if you could go to the next slide, Jenny, please. So very quickly then, just give you a taste of what we see in each of these areas and give some overarching thoughts to finish off. This is the Greenways area just to the north of Tenby, if you go on, Jen. A very soft landscape. Bits of it are quite unkempt in terms of management, you could say, but very much dominated by earth boundary banks, and you can see a nice overgrown example here. But interestingly, even in this little area near the town of Tenby, next, Jen, you find it's not clearness, but that's a nice lynchet with it's got a bit of a hedgerow and now unmanaged hedgerow going across the top of it. But that lynchet, when lynchet is created by differential erosion caused by ploughing over centuries, potentially a very early boundary there, mixed in with a very post-medieval boundary. So even within this, almost on the doorstep of Tenby, you've got hints of a very much earlier landscape. And you go on to the next one again, Jen, please. And then even occasionally you'll come across the remains of a stone-faced, or what do you call it, a Pembrokeshire hedge bank possibly, but a stone-faced bank in poor condition. So immediately you see a great range in an area where you see there's a domination of one type, but there are other types present at all times. Next slide. Go on to Trysor at the back further to the north, very different landscape. Next. Stone abounds. It's a part of the Preseli Commons. You can see it's been de-stoned to create these nice, clean pasture fields. But the stone has been used to make dry stone walls, or verging on rubble walls. As Jenny says, the difference is not always obvious. But stone really is an important feature here. Carry it next, please. But then the Cloddiau Mawr, as it were, the common boundary, very substantial stone-faced bank with an earth core with gorse planted along the top. It's very important to realize that gorse was introduced as a hedging plant. It was grown and planted specifically to strengthen hedges. That's why it's everywhere, and that's why it was used as horse fodder. And you get a winter flowering and a summer flowering gorse, so you've got fodder for horses all year round. Very clever thing associated with hedging and horses. Next, please. And then in the foreground, you've got a store, what I would call rubble bank. It's a bit of an anomaly. It's a mixture of stone and earth. There's a large boulder in it, thrown up quite quickly during land clearance. But in the background, you've got a nice view of the early 19th century landscape enclosures of the Llanfynach Commons, a part of it anyway, where a huge area of upland has been brought into the enclosed land. Again, you'll find rubble banks, lots of stone and earth mixed in with those. They're a bit of a mishmash there, to be honest with you. But in the background of the first bank there, you can see another stone wall. So variation even here is a theme. There's no consistency, is there? Next, please. Down south to Manor Bir, we have, you can see there's something different going on. Look at those long straight strips. Now, there is reason to believe that coming off the ridgeway down to the south there may be elements of a prehistoric landscape in some of these long boundaries, but most of what we're seeing there is fossilizations of medieval strip fields, or early post-medieval strip fields as well, probably. Now, if we go into ground level around Jamestown here, for instance, we see lovely earthwork banks with, very little stone. The stone is probably things the farmer has thrown during ploughing, has just cleared the field and thrown stone to the side, which is they want to do. But these nice earth banks with hedges planted on top. But even then, you'll get sections that are built with stone facing. Is that because of a repair? Is it because there's a gateway there? I'm not sure, but variations of theme. And field systems are generally of those earth banks. But when you go to houses, or generally, fine. Towards near houses around the village, publicly accessible trackways and roadways, you get nice mortared stone walls. They're making much more an effort here. So again, I would emphasize variation within a very relatively small area in this case. Okay, next please. Over to back up to Trysor, to Moylgrove up north. Next please. Another soft landscape, very little stone, lots of nice earth banks with nice hedges set on top of them. But if you look carefully, quite a lot of them will have a stone face. So they're in that Pembrokeshire hedge tradition, stone facing with core of earth on which the hedge is planted. Next, please. And then you hit the management problem. Along the roadsides, they get clipped by tractors and cars and caravans and whatnot, and they start falling apart. And here's your management issue. How do we manage these? And that's an ongoing discussion, really. But you get in the handle what I'm saying here, I think. Next, then down west to Porth Mawr. Sorry, I'm going so fast, but I'm aware of the time. Just back to where Ken was, on the same patch. Now, here's a really interesting landscape, and just note on that to the upper side there, where Jenny's pointing with the arrow, the settlement and field system. There's a prehistoric sort of relict field system northwest of Cloddiau. Not part of our discussion because that's a relic field system. It's not an active field system. It's an archaeological feature, not part of the living landscape as you want, as it were. But this is an interesting area. If you go into the ground level again, Jen, stone is dominant. Cloddiau is a big rocky hill. There's a lot of stone here, and as we saw with Trysor, clearance of stone has led to a lot of stone being incorporated into boundaries. Next, please. Some lovely dry stone walls. As ever, strengthened with fences these days. They run all over the place. But you get some lovely lynchets, but lynchets then supplemented with rubble or stone or stone-faced wall boundary banks with fences. But these, it's quite feasible that some of these lynchets may have prehistoric origins. And the prehistoric field system we saw earlier you're not far away from there. You could even be starting to imagine there could be links with that. So archaeologically, these things may be quite interesting, but even though they're part of the living farmed landscape, as it were. But again, variation we see again. And then I think finally we go down to Dale, to the bottom of the county again. St Anne's Head, now an interesting area with lots of big square fields, suggesting they're quite late enclosure, post-medieval. Typical soft landscape, very little stone, nice big earth banks, really, really nicely built, nicely maintained, quite simple things really. Next, please. But again, if you get close to houses or settlement, they make more effort. Is it for show? I suspect it may be, nice stone-faced banks. You're getting back to the Pembrokeshire hedge tradition again. Very, very nice, but it doesn't take much for them to fall apart. As you can see, the erosion is starting in bits there. And the next one, please. And just finally, I find this an interesting one. This is what PCNP actually been doing for some time. It's a car park, and this is a modern Pembrokeshire hedge bank, if you like. It's the way we try to recreate what was done centuries ago. Nothing wrong with it, but it's a different type of bank almost. It's a new invention. But there's a real challenge amongst all this. I think if you go to the final slide, Jen, just to say very briefly, the thing that we were stymied by with this project was that we did the fieldwork on the eve of the COVID restrictions, and like the best part of 2 years has passed and time stopped. So the discussions and the thought stopped, and the future work stopped at that point. And there's still much to discuss and much to decide, I think, and much to think about. But clearly, from what we're looking at, we have a very complex landscape within which there's a tremendous amount of variation. So any management strategy for boundaries has to be flexible. We have to look at it in great detail at any particular area and respond to what's in front of us, because the farmers that built these boundaries responded to what they needed with the materials they had to hand, and were flexible. They weren't insistent on having a certain thing done. They would do what they needed to do with what they had. And I think that the management of these boundaries has to reflect that. That's my personal opinion. But I will stop there, because I'm aware that time is marching on, and I thank everyone for listening to us. Diolch yn fawr iawn.